I'm not going to do all the prayers and everything that I normally do for the proskymidi because we're not actually doing it, and we'll just cut it up and then we can actually eat the bread, you know.
Okay.
But I'll show you the basic steps. So the first thing that the priest does, there are some kind of introductory prayers as he approaches the table and brings the bread. But then he'll take the bread and make the sign of the cross with it over the chalice and the diskos, and say prayers as he does that. And there are prayers for every step, and the prayers have to do with there are passages that are taken from Scripture describing the Lord's sacrifice, how he gave himself for us. So passages from the Old Testament, for example, like from Isaiah, as a sheep, he was led to the slaughter. So that's one of the things that you say as you make a particular cut. But the way the cuts work is, as you're saying prayers, you cut first this side. So it's the left side here of what we call the lamb, kind of lined up with where those holes are. So you make that cut. And as you can see, it's got a good solid consistency. Sometimes you make that cut and there's a huge cavern here, and then you can't get a good lamb. So that's what we're trying to avoid. And I'm not sure all that goes into creating that problem. I think having it well kneaded is a big part of it. That helps. I think having it rise the proper amount helps. Because sometimes, and usually you can tell because you can kind of knock on it and hear a hollow sound. Right. So you don't have to cut it open usually to know, or you press down and like this will spring right back up. You can tell it's got a solid consistency, but sometimes you can just feel that it's hollow underneath.
Right.
It goes way down when you push on it. So that's what we want it to look like inside. So then after I make this cut all the way across, then I make a cut here, like this. Then the way I do it, and because it's easier for me, is to turn it like that. And the third cut is here on the top, and then the fourth cut is on the bottom. So again, there's a verse that goes with each one. And then after I make those 4 cuts around the lamb, now I'm going to cut underneath. And what the priest says at that point is, for his life is taken up from the earth. And so the loaf will represent the earth, and here's the lamb, which represents Christ, being taken up from the earth. So I don't cut all the way through. As I've made these cuts, as you can see on the bottom, it doesn't go all the way through. So there's going to be a separation at this point. So I put the knife like this. So I'm going to leave some of the loaf underneath, and I'm going to cut like this. And this is still warm, so that changes the consistency. It'll get a little more crumbly as it cools. So you can see how that is. It's kind of it's a cube, basically. Sometimes I'll flare it out a little bit, so it's not exactly a cube. And then after I lift the lamb up, I'll take it upside down like this, and I'm going to cut down the middle, first from top to bottom here, and I'm cutting like a cross, so then I'll make a cut like this. So what you end up with is it's still solid on top, but there are 4 sections that correspond to the 4 sections on the seal: the IC, the XC, the NI, and the KA.
Okay.
Jesus Christ Victor. And then later during the liturgy, so at this point, I place the lamb onto the diskos, which is it's like the plate. It's called paten in Western terminology, the Latin terminology, or diskos in Greek, like a disc. So that's what the lamb goes on. So then the next thing is the priest takes the spear, so not a knife like this, but it actually looks like a spear, and make a cut here on this side, the one that says I see, or Jesus, make a cut, and that represents the soldier piercing the Lord's side. Mm. And after I make the cut, I say, blessed is the union of thy holy things. And I take the chalice, and I take the wine, and I pour wine into the chalice, and then a little bit of water. Just like it says that wine and water, or blood and water, flowed from the Lord's side when he was pierced, right? It says both blood and water pierced from his side. So I add the wine and then a little bit of water. So then I've got this on the center, and what I'll do is I'll just pretend that this is the discos here, and the chalice will be on this side. Turn this, so that's easier to look at it this way. So the discos would be here, the chalice would be here. I've got the wine and the water. So the next thing that I do is taking the spear, but I'll just use the knife in this case. I cut a piece triangularly like this, which is for the Mother of God. And again, there are prayers that go with each cut that's made. And it's a little bit awkward using this big knife to do this, but I'm just giving you the general idea. So you cut a piece that's triangular like that. That represents the Mother of God. And it goes on the priest's left, but that's to the right of the lamb. So it's at the right hand of the Lord, the piece that represents the Lamb, or Lord Jesus Christ. That's his mother, the Theotokos. And maybe I won't do all of these because it's hard with this knife. But you can see here there are these 9 triangles. Mm-hmm. I'm going to cut them out. And there are 2 different ways to do this. They're both commonly done. One is you can just cut a single piece, which is like a square. And maybe I'll do that just to show you with all 9 of those and put it on this side of the lamb. The other way is to cut them out individually, which it's depending on how the loaf comes out, it can be more or less difficult. If it's very dry, those are very hard to make those little cuts because it has to be very precise, So if it's crumbly, then it just kind of all falls apart, and then it would definitely be easier just to do something like this, which is just, you could say, another tradition to do it this way. So, and there's actually something that you say for each one of these triangles, because each one represents one of the orders of saints. So the first is the angels, the second is the prophets, Holy Prophet St. John the Forerunner and all the prophets. Then you have the apostles. Then you have the hierarchs, the great hierarchs like St. John Chrysostom, St. Basil the Great, and so on. Then you have the martyrs, the great martyrs, soldier martyrs, the women martyrs, all the martyrs. Then you have the ascetics, the monastic saints. Then you have unmercenary healers like St. Panteleimon. And then with the 8th one, you say the holy and righteous ancestors of God, Joachim and Anna, Joseph the betrothed, and Simeon the God receiver. So you mentioned those in particular. Then you mentioned the saints of the day, and then the patron saint of the church. And then the last one is the saint whose liturgy it is. So that will either be St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil the Great. Okay. So typically, the way I do it is cutting them all out individually. So you'd see these rows of triangles here. And then after that, I cut out these 2 other pieces that are like the lamb, that have that 4-part seal on top. And this one on top I use to commemorate the living, and this one I use to commemorate the departed. So this can go aside somewhere, and the altar server or somebody can cut it up into pieces. But then I take these and I make commemorations. From the top, I cut triangles for our bishops, Metropolitan Joseph and Bishop Basil. Put those here on the left side, and then when I get to the departed, same thing for hierarchs. I take them from the top, but then all the rest come from the inside, and so we make a little crumb for each person. So if I commemorate Christina, I'd say her name, pray that the Lord would remember her, and put the piece there. So for each person that we commemorate, so you end up with little piles of crumbs there that represent all the people that we're praying for. Orthodox Christians. In the case of somebody who's not an Orthodox Christian, I might pray for them, but I don't commemorate them with the crumb, because this is the members of the church. These are the departed and living members of the Orthodox Church that we're commemorating. Now, obviously, we don't include everybody by name, but as many as we're able to name, we do. And in some traditions, they'll make rows. The living will be above, and then the departed down below, or they're more like round piles for the living on this side and the departed on this side. So then what you end up with is just the discos with all of those pieces prepared like that. And then once you're finished, then you take what's called the star, which is it's like a frame, cross-shaped frame that goes over it to protect it, and then the cover goes on top of that. So that way it doesn't mess up everything that you've prepared. All the pieces of bread aren't messed up. The star is protecting it, and the star represents, the star of Bethlehem. It came over the place where the young child lay. You say that. There's some of the prayers are connected with the Nativity, the Lord's birth, and that one is an example of that. So you put the star, you cense it with the incense, put the star, then you put the cover over that, and then you put the cover over the chalice with a prayer for each one, and then you put the big cover over the whole thing called the air. And then that's it. You're done with proskymedia. There's a sense. There are prayers that you finish with, and then you sense everything, and then it's done. So that's the way that works. So
and you do all of that during before Orthros.
Either before Orthros, or if we're not doing Orthros before liturgy, just before the liturgy, or during Orthros sometimes. It can be done either before Orthros or during Orthros.
Okay.
Yeah, but it all has to be finished before the liturgy begins. Now, I'll mention when it's a hierarchical liturgy and the bishop is serving, then it's done differently, because you prepare all of these pieces for the saints, and then you need to get that into the oven, and then you just commemorate the bishop, and then he does the rest. You leave it. All the other commemorations are for the bishop to do, and that actually does have to take place in the liturgy, because it's after the the censing that goes after the sermon, after the great entrance, and then there's a censing, and then you come to before the great entrance there's a censing, and then you come to the prothesis table where the proskymedia service is done, and then the bishop makes commemorations, and then we begin the great entrance. So
okay,
so let's